Introduction. The beginning of the journey. Life always seems so certain when you're standing on the edge of something new. It's the moment where excitement pulses through your veins and everything feels like it will be perfect, until the first shadow of doubt creeps in. But how do you prepare for the unknown? Can you ever really predict what will happen next? The question seemed innocent enough at first. What if the world you knew wasn't the only one that existed? It was a thought that lingered at the back of his mind, just out of reach, as if something, somewhere, was about to shift. For Lucas, life had always been straightforward. School, friends, dreams of college. But this new curiosity, this nagging question, whispered to him in moments of silence, pulling him into an unknown that neither he nor anyone around him could explain. What would happen if everything he had ever believed in was just a fraction of a greater truth? What if his future wasn't what he had imagined, and all the signs he'd ignored over the years were simply the first cracks in the perfect world he'd been living in? Little did he know, something, or someone, was about to set him on a path where every decision would matter. Every step would hold weight, and every choice could lead him to the heart of a truth far more dangerous than he ever anticipated. With only a glimmer of understanding, Lucas found himself at the start of a journey he had never intended to take, one that would change his life forever. And while the journey ahead was filled with possibilities, it was also shrouded in uncertainty. As the path began to unfold, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far greater and far more dangerous than anything he could have imagined. Chapter 1. The First Signs of Trouble. Lucas was never one to think of himself as special. His life was normal. Sure, he had dreams, like everyone else, but they were simple. He wanted to go to college, become an engineer, and live in the city. He didn't expect life to throw him curveballs or set him on a path of destiny. He didn't even believe in destiny. Everything was neat, clean, predictable. At least, that was how it had always seemed. That morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Lucas noticed something strange. He had been walking to school as usual when for a fleeting moment the air around him shimmered. Just for an instant. He paused, brushing it off as nothing more than a trick of the light. But the moment stuck with him. That afternoon, the first strange event occurred. Lucas was sitting in the cafeteria, talking to his best friend, Mark, when it happened again. This time, the flickering light stretched across the entire room, like a ripple in the air, unnoticed by everyone else. Lucas blinked and glanced around. People were still laughing, eating, and talking, oblivious to the unusual sensation that gnawed at the back of his mind. "What's up with you today?" Mark asked, noticing Lucas staring off into the distance. "Nothing. Just, I don't know. Something feels off," Lucas replied. He couldn't shake the feeling, like a fog that hung in the air, thick and uninviting. The day continued as usual, but the unease didn't leave him. It followed him home, lurked in the back of his thoughts as he did his homework, and lingered while he tried to sleep. There was no explanation, no reason for it, just a growing sense of dread, an unsettling awareness that something wasn't right. That night, as Lucas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he heard something, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A voice. It was so soft, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. His eyes snapped open and he held his breath. But when he listened closely, the voice faded. Was he imagining it? Or had he finally been touched by the strange world that seemed to exist just outside his own? Chapter 2. The Hidden Conflict. In the days that followed, Lucas tried to shake off the strange occurrences. The flickering air, the whisper he couldn't quite place. He told himself they were just his imagination running wild. After all, high school was stressful, and who didn't have moments of feeling out of sync with the world? It was easy enough to brush it off, to chalk it up to stress or lack of sleep. But deep down, a growing sense of unease gnawed at him. His life had always been structured, predictable. Yet the more he tried to ignore the strange happenings, the more they seeped into his world. It was subtle at first. His dreams grew more vivid, filled with fragmented images of places he'd never been and people he'd never met. There were moments when he would lose track of time, standing still in the middle of the hallway, watching people walk by as if they were moving in slow motion, their voices muffled and distant. He'd blink, and suddenly everything would return to normal, but the feeling of displacement lingered like a shadow at the corner of his vision. His friends began to notice his distant behaviour. Mark, ever the joker, tried to lighten the mood by poking fun at his absent-mindedness. "You're acting like you're from another dimension or something. Dude, you sure you're okay?" Lucas forced a smile, brushing it off. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." But Mark wasn't the only one. His teachers had started to comment too. His attention was slipping. He'd zone out during class, unable to focus on the lessons he'd once found easy. The more time passed, the more Lucas realized how much he was pulling away from the life he once found so comforting. He was still physically present, but something was changing inside him. A slow, creeping realization that he didn't entirely belong in the world he'd always known. And then there was the feeling. Every now and then, he would find himself on the verge of understanding, as if the pieces of the puzzle were just about to click together, but every time he reached for it, the answers would slip away, like sand through his fingers. What was happening to him? Was this just some passing phase, or was there something more, something deeper at play? A vague thought lingered at the back of his mind, one he couldn't quite articulate. What if I'm changing in ways I don't even understand? The question stayed with him, whispering like the softest breeze. And yet, he did nothing. Perhaps he wasn't ready to face whatever was happening, or perhaps he was afraid that, if he acknowledged it, it would consume him. To Chapter 3. Facing the First Setback. It wasn't until the day of the school's annual science fair that the cracks finally began to show. Lucas had been working on his project for weeks, an ambitious piece on renewable energy, one he hoped would win him recognition. He'd poured every ounce of focus into it, and despite everything else feeling so off, this was the one thing that still seemed to anchor him. He had the formulas memorized, the data aligned. For the first time in what felt like weeks, he felt somewhat grounded, like things could still work out. But as the presentation drew nearer, something strange happened. Lucas began to feel a strange pressure building in his chest, something that tightened with each breath. The air in the gymnasium seemed to grow thicker, and for the first time, he noticed how many people were staring, watching him. Their faces were familiar, but their expressions felt foreign, as though they weren't quite real. He tried to shake the sensation, focusing on his project, but his hands were trembling. When it was his turn to present, he walked up to the front of the room, and everything blurred. He looked down at his notes, but the words swam on the page, refusing to make sense. His mind raced, the formula he'd practiced so many times slipping from his grasp. He blinked rapidly, trying to steady his thoughts, but the dizziness grew. The whispers started again, this time louder, circling his thoughts, making it impossible to concentrate. "What's wrong with you?" he heard Mark ask from the back of the room. Lucas couldn't answer. He felt as though he were drifting, as though the entire room were slipping away. The audience's eyes, once kind and attentive, now felt accusing. And then, before he knew it, it was over. He'd stumbled through his presentation, barely coherent. The judges seemed kind but confused, offering no critique, only awkward silence. His friends came to congratulate him, but their voices were muted, distant. As Lucas made his way home that afternoon, the weight of failure pressed down on him. Not just for the science fair, it was more than that. He had failed himself. His once perfect world was crumbling before him, and he had no idea why. The more he thought about it, the more he realized something important. He couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. Something deep within him had shifted, and there was no turning back. It wasn't just the strange occurrences or the feeling of not belonging. It was the sense that the world around him was starting to unravel piece by piece. And now he had to confront it. But what was he even confronting? The uncertainty weighed on him heavily. How would he stop what had already started? For the first time, Lucas felt truly lost. The battle had begun, and he had no idea where it would lead. Chapter 4. The Search for Answers. The days after the science fair felt like a blur to Lucas. The embarrassment of his failure haunted him, but it was more than that. It was the constant sense of something being off, something far beyond his grasp. He couldn't ignore it anymore, couldn't pretend it was just stress or a phase. Something had changed, and he needed to figure out what it was before it consumed him completely. Late one night, while scrolling through old websites in search of some distraction, Lucas stumbled across a forum discussing strange phenomena. People who had experienced unsettling feelings, time distortions, even flashes of alternate realities. The forum seemed like an odd place to find answers, but something about it intrigued him. One post, in particular, caught his eye. Have you ever felt like you're not where you're supposed to be? Like you're drifting between worlds? The word struck a chord deep within him. He didn't know why, but he knew he had to learn more. The post referenced a book, a strange one, supposedly filled with accounts of people who had experienced similar events. It was titled The Hidden Realms, Journeys Between Worlds. The idea that there could be more than one reality, more than one world, was a terrifying thought, but it was also one Lucas couldn't shake. The next morning, with a mix of hope and apprehension, he walked into the town's second-hand bookstore. The smell of old paper and dust filled the air as he scoured the shelves, the sense of being watched by countless unread books only adding to his growing unease. After what felt like an eternity of searching, he found the book hidden on a forgotten shelf at the back. Its cover was worn, their edges frayed from years of use. With trembling hands, he pulled it down. That night, Lucas read feverishly. The book contained accounts of people who had experienced strange occurrences, people who had slipped between dimensions, heard voices from other worlds, and felt like they were living in someone else's life. The stories were wild, almost impossible to believe, But as Lucas read, he could feel something stirring inside him. It was as if the stories were his stories, each word drawing out fragments of his own experiences. But the book didn't offer easy answers. It hinted at something larger, something that tied these events together, but never fully explained what was happening. Instead, it spoke of a threshold, a mysterious boundary between realities, where the rules of the world, as Lucas knew them, no longer applied. It promised that those who could navigate the threshold might unlock hidden truths. But there was a price. The more Lucas read, the more a sickening feeling crept over him. It didn't seem like a journey anyone would want to take. Yet it was the only lead he had. Frustrated, Lucas slammed the book closed. He had questions, so many questions, but the answers were always out of reach. What did it mean to be between worlds? How did he even know if he was experiencing the threshold or if it was all in his mind? Was he losing his grip on reality? The next day, he turned to Mark. He didn't want to seem crazy, but Lucas knew he couldn't keep this to himself. They met at their usual spot by the old oak tree behind the school. Mark was tossing a ball back and forth, not looking particularly concerned, but Lucas couldn't hold it in anymore. "Mark, I think something's wrong. I mean, something really wrong. I've been having these experiences, like I'm not here, like I'm fading in and out of reality." Mark stopped the ball mid-air, the laughter fading from his face. "Dude, what are you talking about? You're just stressed out, man. You've been under a lot of pressure with school and—" "No, it's not that. It's like I don't belong here. It's like there's something else." Mark's gaze hardened, and Lucas could see the skepticism in his eyes. "So what? You're telling me you're having some kind of out-of-body experience? Or what? You're hallucinating?" "I'm not crazy. I don't know what's going on, Mark," Lucas said, his voice cracking. "I've been reading about it, and I found this book. It talks about people who experience the same things, slipping between worlds, feeling like they don't fit in." Mark was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he shook his head. "That sounds insane, man. Like for real. You should talk to someone. Maybe a therapist or something. This is bigger than what I can help with." But even as Mark spoke, Lucas could see that doubt in his eyes, the kind that whispered to him that he couldn't count on anyone else to understand. He was alone in this. The realization stung, and the weight of it made his chest feel tight again. Was he really losing his mind? Was it all just stress, as Mark suggested? Yet the answers weren't coming from Mark or from the book. Lucas knew there had to be more to it. He had to dig deeper, find someone who could explain what he was going through. Someone who might have the answers. Later that night, Lucas returned to the bookstore, desperate for any clue that could shed light on his situation. But as he scoured the shelves once again, the same thought kept repeating in his mind. What if the answers are out there, but I'm just too afraid to find them? The search was far from over, and with each passing day, the feeling that something was about to change, something huge, grew stronger, pulling him forward, even though he wasn't sure where the path would lead. Chapter 5. The Turning Point. The days blurred together as Lucas continued, his search for answers, his sense of time slipping further from his grasp. The confusion that had gripped him after the science fair seemed to intensify, a thick fog that clouded his every thought. The book, The Hidden Realms, had only deepened his questions, not provided any solid answers. The more he learned, the more desperate he felt. Each new page only revealed more layers of uncertainty, but despite everything, one thing remained clear. There was something he was missing, something he needed to understand if he was ever going to make sense of what was happening to him. It wasn't until that night, when Lucas had all but given up, that the breakthrough came. He was lying in bed, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The whispering voices have returned, more frequent now, like a distant hum he couldn't escape. As the minutes ticked by, the room around him seemed to stretch, the shadows growing darker and the walls pushing him closer. He couldn't breathe. His heart pounded in his chest, and every inch of his body screamed for escape. But then, just when it seemed like the panic would consume him, something inside him shifted. For the first time since this began, he stopped fighting it. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, allowing himself to sink into this sensation, to stop resisting whatever this strange force was that had been slowly pulling at him. His mind, once frantic, quieted. He let go of his fear, his frustration, and simply allowed the voices, the flickering, the distortion of reality to wash over him. And that's when it happened. There was a sudden flash, a burst of light, like a spark igniting in the dark. And then, everything changed. For the briefest moment he saw it. The edges of the world around him didn't just blur, they shifted. The room was still there, but there was something more to it. He saw the outlines of other places, other versions of the room, other versions of himself, bleeding through, like layers of a painting overlapping and distorting. It was as if he was standing on the edge of multiple realities, 1 foot in each, and for a single heartbeat he knew. He wasn't just experiencing these strange occurrences. He was seeing them for what they truly were, cracks in the fabric of reality itself. He couldn't explain it, but in that moment, everything clicked into place. The threshold. That was what the book had been referring to. The space between worlds, a place where time and reality no longer followed the same rules. And Lucas had been standing right on the edge of it, his every move brushing against this hidden boundary without even realizing it. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. He was changing, yes, but not in the way he had feared. He wasn't losing his grip on reality. He was seeing it for what it truly was. The veil that had once separated him from the true nature of the world had thinned. And he could see the cracks, the points where one reality bled into another. This was why he had felt so displaced, so out of sync with everything around him. It wasn't him. It was the world itself that had started to unravel. The weight of the discovery sank in slowly, like the first drops of rain after a long drought. This was the key, the missing piece. And now that he understood it, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't turn back anymore. If the fabric of reality was fraying, if the worlds were slipping through the cracks, he was the one who had to find a way to fix it. But how? Lucas felt a surge of both fear and excitement. He had no roadmap, no guide to show him the way forward. The book had only scratched the surface, offering cryptic warnings and vague hints, but nothing concrete. The only thing he knew for sure was that he wasn't going to find answers by hiding in his room, reading more books, or pretending this wasn't happening. He needed to go deeper. The next day, Lucas woke up with a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in weeks. The fog had lifted, replaced by a sharp clarity. The questions that had once felt overwhelming now seemed like a challenge to solve, not a mystery to fear. But there was still so much he didn't understand. The threshold, the space between realities, wasn't just some distant concept. It was real. And Lucas had been walking right on the edge of it, unable to see the full scope of what was happening. He knew he had to find a way to navigate through it, to step fully into this new understanding of the world. He thought about the people in the Fallen, the ones who had experienced these things before. They might have answers. They might have the knowledge he needed to take the next step. But there was another piece to the puzzle he couldn't ignore. The voice. The one he had heard whispering to him in the quiet moments. It was soft, distant, but it had been there from the start. He wasn't a loneliness. Someone, or something, was guiding him, pushing him toward this moment. But why? And what was he meant to do with this newfound knowledge? Lucas knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. He could feel it deep in his bones. The world he thought he knew was shifting, and his place in it was changing too. Whatever came next, he couldn't stand still. He had to move forward, even if he didn't fully understand where it would take him. The answers were out there, waiting for him to find them. And now that he understood the true nature of the world, his world, he was ready to face whatever came next. But would he be able to control it, or would he become just another casualty of the unraveling reality? The stakes were higher than ever before, and Lucas had no choice but to follow the path ahead, wherever it might lead. Chapter 6. The New Path. Lucas had finally made a decision. After days of uncertainty and confusion, the breakthrough he'd had in the quiet of his room had given him clarity. The threshold was real. The worlds, multiple versions of his own reality, were slipping through the cracks, and it was his responsibility to understand why. With this newfound sense of purpose, he knew he had to embrace a new approach to his life. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine or wait for answers to come to him. It was time to act. Armed with the knowledge from the hidden realms and his own experiences, Lucas began investigating the nature of these cracks, this place between worlds. He started seeking out more obscure books, searching online forums, and reaching out to people who had claimed to have similar experiences. At first, it seemed like his efforts were paying off. He made connections with people who had felt the same sense of disconnection. Some had theories about the threshold. Others spoke of strange rituals they'd used to navigate between worlds. Lucas didn't fully understand everything he was hearing, but there was one common thread among them all. The threshold wasn't a place to be afraid of. It was a doorway, an opportunity to see the world beyond what was visible, to explore the truth hidden beneath the surface. One night, while trying an exercise from one of the online groups, an ancient meditation technique designed to thin the veil between realities, Lucas felt the most intense sensation yet. The air around him shimmered. His room blurred, like a photograph melting under the heat of the sun. He could see his reflection in the window, but it wasn't him. The figure staring back had a different posture, a different expression. For a moment, Lucas was paralyzed, but he didn't panic. This was what he had been preparing for. This was a breakthrough. He pulled back from the edge, his heart pounding in his chest. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of achievement. He was getting closer. He could feel it. But as he tried to repeat the process the next night, nothing happened. The air remained still, the room unchanged. Frustration gnawed at him. Had he been wrong? Was it all just a trick of his mind? The ups and downs were wearing him down, but Lucas knew that he had to push forward. He couldn't afford to give up. Each failed attempt made him more determined to succeed. He dove deeper into his studies, trying everything he could think of to replicate that moment of clarity. The lines between the worlds were still there, just out of reach, and Lucas was desperate to understand them. But as he continued his search, the world around him started to change in unsettling ways. People at school began to act strangely, like they were out of sync with him. His teachers were talking to him, but their voices sounded distant and muffled. The floor under his feet seemed to shift slightly, as if he were standing on unstable ground. It was as though he were losing touch with the world, even as he tried to understand it. Every day, the boundary between what was real and what was slipping away became thinner, and Lucas didn't know if he was ready for the consequences of what he was chasing. Chapter 7. The Unexpected Challenge. Just when Lucas thought he was making progress, the challenge came. It hit him suddenly and without warning. One afternoon, while meeting with a few people from the online group, someone mentioned something that sent a chill down his spine. "We've been able to see the cracks for a while now," one person said, "but there's something you need to understand. The more you see them, the more you become them." Lucas frowned. "What does that mean?" "You'll start to notice more cracks," they continued, "but you can't control them. They'll start to control you." It was the first time Lucas had heard this idea, the notion that once you opened yourself to the threshold, you didn't have the power to simply step back. The cracks, the other worlds, would start to bleed into your life in unpredictable ways. The more you saw, the more you could lose yourself. And that's when it happened. The next morning, Lucas woke to find that his reflection in the bathroom mirror wasn't his own. The face staring back at him was pale, drawn, like something out of a nightmare. His eyes were different, darker, almost hollow, and the expression on his face was one of utter confusion. He blinked, but the reflection didn't change. His heart skipped a beat. For a second, he thought it was a trick of the light, but when he stepped back from the mirror, the face remained. The reflection wasn't him. Panic surged through him as he backed away, his mind racing. Had he crossed a line he couldn't come back from? Was this the cost of uncovering the truth about the threshold? He wasn't sure what had happened, but it felt like the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel around him. He had been so focused on understanding what was happening to him, so intent on finding answers, that he had never considered what it might mean if he couldn't control the cracks he was seeing. This wasn't what he expected. The world he was trying to uncover was not just fascinating, it was dangerous. And now, Lucas realized, he had to face the full weight of what that meant. The cracks were no longer something he could simply study from the outside. They were bleeding into his life, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it together. The challenge wasn't just the search for answers, it was surviving the consequences of those answers. Would he be able to find a way to control the threshold? Or would he be swallowed by the very forces he was trying to understand? The tension in the air was thick, and Lucas knew he had to act fast. The question was, could he? Chapter 8. The Moment of Doubt. Lucas had always prided himself on his determination, on his ability to push through when things got difficult. But the last few days had felt different. The cracks were getting wider, more visible. His reflection no longer looked like him, and every time he stepped into a new room, the air felt off, like he wasn't alone. It was as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets, taunting him with answers he couldn't reach. And now, the more he tried to unravel the mystery, the more it seemed like he was sinking deeper into it. For the first time in this journey, Lucas doubted himself. He stood in front of the mirror again, this time willing himself to see something familiar, something real. But the face staring back at him was still wrong, pale, distant, disconnected. He felt a tightness in his chest. Was this his new reality? Was he slipping away so far into the cracks that he couldn't even recognize his own reflection anymore? His thoughts spiraled. The people he had met, those who claimed to understand the threshold, were disappearing. The messages stopped coming, No one answered his questions. The exercises, the rituals, the deep meditations, none of them worked the way they had before. Every time he thought he was close to breaking through, the world around him seemed to push him further back. Lucas sank to his knees on the floor, his hands pressed against his face, the weight of it all crashing down. He had always believed there was something more to reality than what he had been taught, that the cracks in the world were waiting for someone like him to uncover them. But now he wasn't so sure. The uncertainty gnawed at him. What if he was wrong? What if this whole thing was a mistake, a twisted journey of self-doubt and fear? Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe he had imagined the cracks, the shifting rooms, the strange reflections. The thought of giving up, of walking away from everything he had fought for, felt like a relief, even if just for a moment. But then, in the midst of the darkness, a thought struck him. Was this what the threshold was supposed to be? A place of uncertainty, a challenge to everything he thought he knew. Could it be that this moment of doubt was the real test, the true measure of his strength? He stared at his reflection one last time, unsure of what he was looking at. But for the first time in days, the face in the mirror seemed to soften. It was his face, but not quite. It was someone on the verge of change, someone who had to choose whether to give in or keep going. He wasn't sure what the next step was, or even if there was a next step, but for the first time, Lucas allowed himself to feel vulnerable. He didn't have all the answers, and maybe that was okay. Chapter 9. Rediscovery and Recommitment. The next morning, the weight that had been pressing on Lucas's chest seemed a little lighter. He hadn't found a solution, but something inside him had shifted. The doubt hadn't disappeared entirely, but he had begun to accept it as part of the process. Maybe the world wasn't as predictable as he'd once believed. Maybe he wasn't as certain as he had thought. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. As he sat down at his desk, a scrap of paper caught his attention. It was something he had written days ago, notes from the hidden realms, scribbled in the margins, about the nature of the threshold. One sentence stood out, something he had overlooked before. The threshold is not just a place. It is a test of will. Lucas read the words again, and something clicked inside him. The journey hadn't just been about discovering the cracks in reality. It had been about discovering himself, his ability to adapt, to push forward, even when the answers weren't clear. The uncertainty was part of it. The doubt, the fear. It was all part of learning how to navigate this strange new world. His purpose had always been about finding truth, but now it was about something deeper, living the truth, even if it was messy and uncertain. The threshold wasn't just something he had to understand, it was something he had to embrace. A wave of clarity washed over him. He was ready to push forward. His path wasn't going to be easy, but that was never the point. The point was that he had chosen it. The fear, the doubt, the confusion. It would always be there, but now it would fuel him, not hold him back. He wasn't going to give up on himself, not now, not when he was so close to something bigger than he had ever imagined. Lucas took a deep breath and stood up. His journey wasn't over, it had only just begun. The cracks might still be there, and the world might still be shifting beneath his feet, but he had the strength to keep moving forward. He didn't know where the road would lead, but for the first time, he didn't need to. He was ready to face whatever came next. With renewed determination, Lucas stepped out of his room, ready to confront the next challenge, and whatever answers the threshold had waiting for him. Chapter 10. The Final Confrontation. The threshold had never felt so close, yet so impossible to reach. Lucas stood at the center of the distorted room, his heart racing, his breath shallow. The world around him felt like it was bending, stretching, shifting in ways he couldn't control. The cracks in reality were now fully open before him, revealing glimpses of other worlds, flickering visions of places that didn't quite exist, versions of his life that were both familiar and foreign. He had reached the final step, the culmination of everything he had experienced. The moment where he would either understand the threshold and master it, or be consumed by it. As the cracks deepened, Lucas could hear the voices again. They were louder now, swirling around him like a chorus of whispers. Some of the voices were familiar, fragments of conversations from his life. Others were alien, distorted, as though coming from places beyond the world he knew. All of them were urging him forward, beckoning him to step through, to embrace the chaos of this unknown reality. But Lucas hesitated. The book had warned him. The threshold will claim those who cannot control it. The more you see, the more you become part of the unraveling. He understood now what that meant. If he stepped through, if he let the cracks consume him, there would be no going back. He would lose himself, his reflection, his identity, everything that anchored him to the world he had known. He had no guarantees. There was no roadmap, no safety net. This was the ultimate test of his will. But what choice did he have? The cracks were already swallowing his reality. He had already seen too much. There was no return from this, only forward. Lucas closed his eyes, taking a steadying breath. He reached out with everything he had learned, the meditation techniques, the rituals, the understanding that the cracks weren't a curse, but an invitation. An invitation to choose which path he would walk, even if he didn't fully understand what it meant. He had to control the threshold. He couldn't let it control him. With a final determined step, Lucas walked forward. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world around him shifted violently. His vision spun. The floor seemed to collapse beneath him, and for an instant he was weightless, suspended between multiple realities. He felt himself pulled in all directions, each version of himself, each version of the world, clamoring for dominance. But then, in the chaos, he found his center, his focus. He remembered the core truth. The threshold was not a place to fear, but a place to embrace. He let go of the fear, let go of the need to control everything. The key was in letting the flow of the worlds pass through him, acknowledging their existence without becoming lost in them. With that realization, the pull of the cracks lessened. The worlds began to stabilize, the chaos calming, as if his acceptance had realigned them. But even as the energy swirled around him, Lucas knew that the final confrontation had not been just with the cracks in reality. It had been with himself. And now, as he stood at the precipice of this new world, he could only wonder, had he succeeded, or was he too late? Chapter 11. The Resolution. Lucas opened his eyes, and the world slowly returned to focus. The room was still there, his room, but it felt different. The air was clearer, the edges of everything sharper. The cracks were gone, or at least not visible in the way they had been before. The unsettling distortions had faded, leaving only a quiet stillness behind. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. His heart was still pounding, his body tired from the intensity of what he had just experienced, but he didn't feel the same. Something inside him had shifted, and he wasn't sure if it was the world that had changed, or if it was him. Lucas looked around. It was as if the veil had been lifted, revealing the world for what it truly was. He didn't have all the answers yet. There were still so many unknowns, so many cracks that could reopen. But now, he felt equipped to face whatever came next. He understood the threshold wasn't an enemy to be defeated. It was a force to be navigated, something that could be understood and used to change the course of his life. He stood up, feeling the weight of the journey press against him in a new way. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty. It was all still there, but it no longer controlled him. He had learned to use it, to move forward despite it. That was the true victory. He hadn't just learned how to cross the threshold. He had learned how to live with it. And in doing so, he had gained control over his own life again. The door to his room creaked open, and Lucas turned to find his mother standing there, looking at him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. She must have noticed something was different, though she could not have known what he had just experienced. "Lucas," she said softly, "are you okay?" He smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in weeks. "Yeah, Mum," he said, his voice steady. "I think I am." It was over, or at least it had changed. There was no grand, perfect resolution. The world was still full of mysteries and uncertainties, but Lucas knew now that he could face whatever came next, whatever cracks might appear in the future. He had embraced the journey, not just the destination, and in doing so, he had found the strength to keep moving forward. The cracks in reality might still be out there, but Lucas no longer feared them. He had learned to navigate the unknown, and in the process, he had found himself. And that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. Conclusion. The new beginning. Lucas stood on the threshold of a new chapter in his life, the weight of everything he had experienced settling into a quiet understanding. His journey had been nothing short of transformative. From the uncertainty of the cracks in reality to the acceptance that the threshold was not an enemy but a challenge to be faced, he had learned more than he could have imagined. He had learned that growth wasn't always linear, that it often required stepping into the unknown, even when the path ahead was unclear. The most important lesson, though, was this: control doesn't come from conquering everything around you. It comes from learning to navigate what you cannot control. Lucas had embraced his fears, doubts, and uncertainties, and in doing so, he had found a new kind of strength. He no longer felt the need to have all the answers. He understood now that the journey itself, the willingness to face what was difficult and unknown, was just as important as the destination. As Lucas moved forward, he realized that this was not the end of his journey, but the beginning of something even greater. There would always be cracks in the world, always moments of doubt and fear. But now, armed with the lessons he had learned, Lucas knew he could face whatever came next. He wasn't afraid to keep walking through the doors that life opened for him, no matter how uncertain they seemed. And so, the journey continues. Not just for Lucas, but for anyone who dares to step into the unknown, to embrace uncertainty, and to grow from the challenges that life throws their way. We all have our own cracks to face. The question is, will we walk through them, or will we let them stop us? The choice is ours. The adventure is just beginning.